My name is Elena Harper, and I was 42 years old the night my mother-in-law decided my 8-year-old daughter didn't belong in our family. It happened at my sister-in-law's wedding under strings of warm fairy lights draped across an old wooden dance floor. 120 guests had spent the entire afternoon whispering about the important colonel who was supposedly coming. Sophie, my little girl, was spinning in her favorite pink ballet shoes, the ones with the tiny satin ribbons she had begged me to tie twice before we left the house. She wasn't bothering anyone. She was just dancing to that song she loved, the one we always called our song. Then a hand shot out, grabbed her wrist, and yanked hard. The sound my daughter made in that moment still lives somewhere behind my ribs. Not a loud cry, just a small, shocked gasp, like the air had been stolen from her lungs. Her left pink shoe flew off and landed on its side near the edge of the floor, the ribbon trailing like a broken promise. That was only the first thing that broke that night. The second was the look on my husband's face when he chose silence. The third was the hospital door at 7:45 p.m., and the final one, the one nobody at that wedding saw coming, was the name they had spent all day waiting for. Because the colonel they kept talking about, that was me. Welcome to this story. If you're watching right now, I want you to know something. If you've ever sat at a family table smiling politely while feeling completely invisible, if you've ever been the one who shows up, but somehow still doesn't belong, then stay with me. This one might feel heavy, but I promise there's light on the other side. Drop a comment with the word boundaries if this already hits close to home. I had flown back from a 12-week overseas assignment just 2 days before the wedding. In my husband's family, that translated into one simple dismissive sentence: Elena is off doing her military thing again. My mother-in-law, Vivian, said it like it was the weather, something unfortunate but predictable. I never corrected her. I had learned years ago that correcting Vivian cost more energy than it was worth. She was 68, elegant in that sharp, calculated way, and she ran every family gathering like a general defending her territory. This wedding mattered more than most. Her only daughter, Lauren, was finally getting married, and Vivian had planned every detail for over a year. The Lakeview Estate reception hall, the perfect flowers, the curated guest list, everything had to be flawless. And in the middle of that flawless picture, there was me, the daughter-in-law who was never quite there enough, the one whose job was vague and inconvenient. The one whose child, according to Vivian, was a little too wild because her mother is never home. I had heard those lines so many times I could recite them in my sleep. But here's what they didn't know, what almost no one outside my unit knew: I wasn't just in the military. I was a full colonel in the United States Army, responsible for logistics and command operations that most people would never hear about. I had spent the last 9 years balancing deployments, late-night briefings, and trying to be the kind of mother who could still make her daughter feel safe even from 6,000 miles away. I didn't wear the uniform at family events. Not because I was ashamed. I was never ashamed. I stayed quiet because I had learned that my rank made people uncomfortable. It changed the temperature in the room, and for the longest time I chose peace over proving myself. That choice ended on the night of Lauren's wedding. Sophie had been so excited. She wore a soft lavender dress and those pink ballet shoes that squeaked just a little when she spun. Every time the music hit the chorus of Tiny Dancer, she would light up like the whole world belonged to her. I watched her from the side of the floor, holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, while the whispers floated around me. The colonel is coming later. Dale said he's someone important from the base. Vivian's been talking about it for weeks. They were waiting for a man in dress greens with silver eagles on his shoulders. They never once considered it could be the quiet woman in the navy blue dress standing near the dessert table. I smiled through it all. I always did. But inside, something had been shifting for months. Every time Vivian made a comment about my absence, every time she looked at Sophie with that disappointed sigh, every time Ryan asked me to just let it go for family's sake, a quiet resolve was building. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my daughter to know she was never the problem. I had no idea that night would be the moment everything finally came into focus. So if you're still here with me, breathing slow, let me take you back to that evening. Let me show you exactly how a woman who had spent years choosing silence finally decided it was time to speak, not with volume, but with truth. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't raising your voice. It's simply refusing to disappear anymore. And that night, under those fairy lights, with my daughter's pink ballet shoe lying forgotten on the dance floor, I stopped disappearing. Ryan and I had been married for 9 years, but sometimes it felt like I had been married to his family even longer. Vivian Brenner, my mother-in-law, wasn't the cartoonish villain who screamed all the time. She was much more dangerous than that. She was soft-spoken, always perfectly dressed, and she knew exactly how to wound you with a gentle smile and a well-placed comment. At 68, she had spent decades building her identity as the unbreakable center of the family. Everything revolved around her approval, her traditions, her version of how things should be. I understood where some of it came from, though understanding never made it easier to live with. Years ago, Vivian's own mother-in-law had humiliated her publicly at her wedding, called her not good enough for this family in front of 200 guests. That wound never fully healed. Instead, it hardened into armor. Vivian decided she would never be the one overlooked again, so she became the one who controlled every narrative, every gathering, every quiet power struggle. Ryan was her oldest child and in many ways her favorite buffer. He was 44, kind-hearted, and had spent his whole life smoothing over his mother's sharp edges. "She means well," he would say with that tired half-smile whenever Vivian made another comment about my career. "She just worries about Sophie growing up without a steady mom around." He truly believed that keeping the peace was the same as protecting his family. I loved him for his gentle heart, but I was starting to realize that his version of peace came at a high cost, mostly paid by me and our daughter. Then there was Sophie, my bright, sensitive 8-year-old who felt everything deeply. She had my dark hair and Ryan's soft brown eyes. She loved ballet, drawing pictures of our family holding hands, and asking me endless questions about the places I went when I was helping the soldiers. Every time I came home from deployment, she would run to me so hard it almost knocked the breath out of both of us. But the older she got, the more she noticed the way her grandmother looked at her, that slight tightening around the eyes, the little sighs when Sophie got too excited or too loud. "Mommy," she asked me once after a family dinner, "why does Grandma say I'm too much sometimes?" I held her close that night and whispered that she was exactly enough, but inside it broke something in me. No child should ever have to wonder if they're too much for their own family. Vivian had been dropping hints about the Colonel for weeks before Lauren's wedding. "We have a very important guest coming," she would say with that proud little lift of her chin. "Someone high up from the base. It's going to make the whole day feel complete." She assumed it was a man, of course. In her world, colonels were authoritative older gentlemen with deep voices and firm handshakes, never the quiet wife who mostly stayed in the background. I let her believe it. Looking back, I can see I had been preparing for this moment longer than I realized. Not in an angry way, I wasn't plotting revenge. I was simply tired of shrinking myself to fit into a story that was never written for me. I had spent years choosing silence because I thought it protected Sophie from family conflict. But silence was starting to feel like another kind of abandonment. The week before the wedding, I sat in my car outside the house after picking Sophie up from school. She was in the back seat humming Tiny Dancer, swinging her little legs, still wearing those pink ballet shoes. I watched her in the rearview mirror and made a quiet promise to myself. This time, I wouldn't explain, I wouldn't defend, I would simply stop hiding who I was. If you've ever lived in that strange space where you're respected at work but dismissed at home, you know how exhausting it is. You start carrying two versions of yourself, the strong, capable one and the one who smiles through being erased. I was done carrying both. Vivian had spent months curating the perfect wedding for her daughter. She chose the venue, the flowers, the seating chart. She even decided who sat at the head table and who got placed near the back. In her version of events, I was somewhere in the middle, tolerated but not celebrated. The daughter-in-law who was always away doing that government job. She never once asked what that job actually involved. She never asked about the nights I stayed up coordinating supply lines so soldiers had what they needed in dangerous places. She never asked how hard it was to video call my daughter from the other side of the world while trying not to cry. Those details didn't fit her story, so they simply didn't exist. Ryan knew more, of course. He had seen me in uniform, he had met some of my colleagues. But even he struggled to bridge the gap between the colonel I was in the army and the wife his mother expected me to be. "Let's not rock the boat tonight," he said the morning of the wedding as I zipped up my garment bag in the closet. "It's Lauren's day." I nodded. I had heard that sentence so many times it had started to sound like background noise. But something had changed in me. I kissed Sophie's forehead, adjusted the ribbon on her pink ballet shoes, and told her she could dance as much as she wanted. "Just stay where I can see you, okay, baby?" She smiled up at me with so much trust it made my chest tight. That was the last truly peaceful moment of the night. Because a few hours later, Vivian would make sure everyone understood exactly where she thought my daughter belonged, and it wasn't on that dance floor. Those pink ballet shoes became more than just shoes for Sophie. They were her little armor, her way of saying, "I'm here, I'm happy, look at me spin." I bought them for her 6th birthday, right before one of my longer deployments. She wore them everywhere, to the grocery store, during video calls when I was halfway across the world, and especially when she wanted to show me she had practiced her twirls just like I asked. In the quiet moments between assignments, I would sit on the edge of her bed after she fell asleep and trace the scuffed toes of those shoes. They reminded me how much I missed, the everyday things. The school drop-offs, the silly arguments over vegetables, the way she would crawl into my lap and ask if soldiers ever get scared. I always told her the truth, yes, but we learn how to be brave anyway. My career never felt like a choice that took me away from her. It felt like the path I was meant to walk, one that let me provide stability for our family while serving something bigger. But Vivian never saw it that way. To her, my absences were proof that I had chosen the army over my daughter. She would say things like, "A girl Sophie's age needs her mother's hands, not phone calls from time zones away." She said it gently, always with that concerned tilt of her head like she was just a worried grandmother looking out for her granddaughter. What she didn't know was how I carried every single one of those comments home with me. How I would lie awake next to Ryan after coming back from a mission, replaying her words while staring at the ceiling. I questioned myself more times than I can count. Was I failing Sophie? Was my ambition really selfishness, dressed up as duty? But then I would look at my daughter, at how confident she was, how she spoke about my work with pride to her teachers, how she drew pictures of me as a superhero in uniform, and I knew the truth. I wasn't failing her, I was showing her what strength looks like. Ryan tried to bridge the gap, but his loyalty was split. He loved me, I never doubted that, but he had grown up under Vivian's roof where her happiness was the family's compass. "She had a hard life, Elena," he would say softly after another tense dinner. Her own mother-in-law made her feel small, she's just scared of the same thing happening to Lauren. I understood the psychology of it, I really did. Hurt people often pass on their pain in quiet, elegant ways. Vivian wasn't cruel for sport. She was protecting the only version of family she knew how to control. But understanding her pain didn't give her permission to hurt mine. The night before the wedding, Sophie and I had a quiet moment in the hotel room. She was trying on her lavender dress again, twirling in front of the mirror. Those pink shoes squeaked against the carpet. "Mommy, will Grandma be happy if I dance really good tomorrow?" she asked, her big eyes searching mine. My throat tightened. I knelt down, cupped her face, and said, "You dance for you, baby, not for anyone else, and no matter what, you are wanted here. You are loved exactly as you are." She hugged me tight, her small arms around my neck, and whispered, "I wish you didn't have to go away so much." That sentence stayed with me. It wasn't an accusation, it was just honest, and it made the decision I had been carrying even clearer. I was done shrinking, done letting Vivian define our worth. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while being told you're the problem, if you've ever smiled through comments that chipped away at your confidence as a parent, you know how heavy that weight gets. I had carried it for 9 years, 9 years of being the military mom who was never quite enough. But something inside me had reached its limit, not in anger but in quiet clarity. I wasn't going to announce my rank, I wasn't going to argue or defend, I was simply going to stop hiding. Let the truth do what it does when it finally steps into the light. I zipped my dress blues into the garment bag that evening and hung it in the back of my car. No one saw it, not Ryan, not Vivian, not even Sophie. It was my silent promise. The next day at the wedding, the air felt different from the beginning. There was this undercurrent of excitement about the mysterious colonel. Vivian moved through the crowd like a queen, touching arms, laughing softly, reminding everyone how perfectly she had arranged everything. She introduced me to relatives with that same familiar line, "This is Elena, Ryan's wife. She's in the military when she's not away, of course." The smiles I received were polite, distant, the kind you give someone you've already decided is temporary. I held Sophie's hand a little tighter. I watched her laugh with the other kids. I reminded myself to breathe. Because I knew what they didn't, the colonel they were all waiting for wasn't coming later. She was already there. The reception at Lakeview Estate was beautiful in that picture-perfect way Vivian loved. White chairs lined the lawn, string lights twinkled like stars caught in the trees, and the wooden dance floor gleamed under soft golden lights. Everything looked flawless on the surface. But I could feel the tension underneath, like a current running just below still water. Sophie was in her element. She had been waiting all week for this moment, the music, the lights, the chance to dance in her pink ballet shoes. Every time the DJ played the opening notes of Tiny Dancer, her whole face lit up. She would tug my hand and say, "Mommy, this is our song." Then she'd spin out onto the floor, arms wide, ribbons trailing behind her like pink comet tails. I stood at the edge watching her, my heart full even as the whispers swirled around me. Vivian moved through the crowd like she owned every conversation. I caught pieces of what she was saying. "We have a very special guest arriving later, a colonel from the base. It's such an honor for Lauren's big day." She said it with that proud, practiced smile, the one that made people lean in closer. No one questioned her. Why would they? In her version of the story, I was just Ryan's wife who traveled a lot for some vague government job, the absent mother, the one who couldn't quite keep up. A few times she passed near me and offered one of her gentle jabs. "Elena, sweetheart, try to keep Sophie close tonight. We don't want her getting too wild in front of important people." She touched my arm lightly, the way she always did, like she was giving helpful advice instead of criticism. I smiled and nodded. I had perfected that response over the years. Calm on the outside, even while something inside me tightened. Ryan stayed close but distracted. He was busy helping with last-minute details, laughing with his sister Lauren, and occasionally squeezing my shoulder with a quiet, "You okay?" I told him I was fine. What else could I say? This was his family's day. I didn't want to pull focus. But every time Sophie ran back to me breathless and happy, asking if I saw her best spin, I noticed how Vivian's eyes narrowed just a fraction, like my daughter's joy was somehow inconvenient. If you've ever been at a family event where everyone smiles for the photos but you feel like an outsider in your own story, you know that slow burn. It's not loud. It's the small comments, the polite exclusions, the way your child starts to sense they're being watched too closely. I saw Sophie hesitate once after a big twirl when she caught Vivian's expression. That hesitation hurt more than any direct insult ever could. I kept my phone in my pocket on vibrate. Work could call at any time, that was part of the job, but tonight I hoped for just a few uninterrupted hours. Just long enough for Sophie to dance and feel completely wanted. Around 6:30, the energy on the dance floor shifted. More kids joined Sophie. She was in the middle of them, laughing, spinning, her pink shoes squeaking happily with every pivot. I felt proud watching her, this bright little girl who carried joy so easily even when parts of her world tried to dim it. I stepped back to grab a water, and that's when I heard Vivian talking to one of her close friends near the bar. She's a sweet child, but you can tell she doesn't have enough structure with Elena always gone. Military families, it's just different. The words landed like small stones in my chest. I didn't confront her. Not then. I simply filed it away with all the others. Years of being told indirectly that I was the reason my daughter might not be right. Years of choosing silence so I wouldn't ruin family moments. But silence has a limit. I walked back toward the floor and caught Sophie's eye. She waved with both hands, cheeks flushed, completely alive. In that second, I made another quiet promise. Whatever happened tonight, I would make sure she never left this place doubting her place in this family. The sun had gone down fully now. The fairy lights glowed brighter. Guests kept checking the entrance, waiting for that important colonel to arrive and make the night feel complete. Vivian kept glancing at her watch, then at the gate, her excitement barely contained. She had no idea the colonel was already standing 20 feet away, wearing a simple navy dress and holding back everything she had carried for 9 long years. The stage was set, the music kept playing, and my daughter kept dancing, innocent, joyful, and completely unaware that her grandmother was about to cross a line no one could uncross. The music swelled again, that familiar opening piano of Tiny Dancer filling the warm evening air. Sophie's favorite. She heard it before I did and let go of my hand with a happy little squeal. "This is our song, Mommy." She ran straight onto the wooden dance floor, her lavender dress floating around her, those pink ballet shoes already squeaking with every excited step. I stood at the edge, smiling as she found her rhythm. She spun with her arms out, head tilted back, completely lost in the joy of the moment. Other kids joined her, forming a loose circle. For a few precious seconds, everything felt right. The fairy lights caught the ribbons in her shoes, and she looked like pure happiness in motion. I felt my chest loosen just watching her. Then it happened so fast I almost couldn't process it. Vivian stepped onto the dance floor with purpose. Her face was tight, that polite mask she usually wore cracking at the edges. She reached out, grabbed Sophie's left wrist with surprising strength, and yanked her backward toward the grass. Hard. Sophie stumbled, trying to keep her balance. A sharp, startled cry escaped her lips, not a full scream, but the sound of a child who suddenly doesn't understand why the world turned mean. One of her pink ballet shoes flew off, landing on its side near the center of the floor, the satin ribbon trailing sadly. "No military brat is going to ruin my daughter's perfect day." Vivian's voice cut through the music, loud enough for the entire reception to hear. "Get her out of here. Now." The words landed like a slap across the whole crowd. 120 people went quiet in waves. The music kept playing for a few awkward seconds before the DJ faded it out. Heads turned. Phones that had been recording the kids dancing suddenly pointed in a different direction. Sophie was holding her wrist against her chest, her face crumpled in pain and confusion. She looked so small standing there next to her grandmother, one shoe on, one shoe gone, tears already starting to spill down her cheeks. I moved without thinking. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady as I crossed the floor. I didn't yell, I didn't make a scene. I simply dropped to my knees in front of my daughter, right there in front of everyone. "Sophie, baby, look at me, I've got you." I gently took her face in my hands, wiping her tears with my thumbs. Her left wrist was already blooming with angry red fingerprints. I could see the way she was favoring it, not wanting to move it. Vivian was still talking above us, her voice rising with that familiar mix of justification and control. "She was spinning out of control, Elena. Someone had to do something. You're never here to discipline her properly, so I had to step in." I didn't look at her. Not yet. My focus was entirely on Sophie. I picked up the fallen pink ballet shoe from the floor and held it in my lap. The ribbon felt impossibly delicate in my fingers. If you've ever watched someone hurt your child while the whole world watched and did nothing, you know that strange, cold clarity that takes over. Time slows down. Your mind goes quiet except for the one thing that matters, protecting your baby. Ryan was pushing through the crowd now, his face pale. His uncle had a hand on his shoulder, murmuring something about not making a scene. Lauren, the bride, stood frozen near the cake table with her hands over her mouth. Vivian's close friends were already nodding along, whispering about how kids these days have no boundaries. But I saw the cracks too. A few guests looked uncomfortable. An older woman near the back shook her head slowly. Not everyone was buying the story Vivian was spinning. I lifted Sophie carefully into my arms, supporting her hurt wrist against my chest. She buried her face in my neck, her small body trembling. "We're leaving," I said quietly to Ryan as I passed him. My voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Now." He looked torn, glancing between me, our daughter, and his mother, who had already started rebuilding the narrative for the guests around her. "Elena, wait, Mom didn't mean." But I kept walking. Sophie's remaining shoe squeaked once against my side as I carried her toward the parking lot. Behind me, I could hear Vivian's voice carrying on the night air, already reshaping the moment into something that protected her image. I didn't argue, I didn't explain. I just kept walking with my daughter in my arms and her single pink ballet shoe in my hand. That night, the illusion finally shattered, and the kernel they had all been waiting for, she was about to stop hiding. The walk to the car felt endless, even though it was only 60 yards across the gravel lot. Sophie clung to me with her good arm, her face pressed into my shoulder, still shaking with those quiet, heartbreaking sobs that come when a child's trust has been suddenly shattered. Her one remaining pink ballet shoe squeaked softly against my dress with every step. I kept whispering to her, "I've got you, baby, Mommy's here, you're safe now." Ryan caught up to us just as I was buckling Sophie into her booster seat. His tie was loosened, his hair messy from running his hands through it. He looked completely lost. "Elena, Mom's crying back there. She says she was only trying to protect the wedding. Everyone's staring." His voice cracked. "Can we just talk about this?" I turned to face him, keeping my voice low and even. "Our daughter's wrist is hurt, Ryan. She's in pain. I'm taking her to the ER. You can stay and keep the peace if you need to, but we're leaving." He glanced back toward the glowing lights of the reception, then at Sophie in the back seat, who was cradling her wrist and staring at the floor. Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of real fear. He climbed into the passenger seat without another word. The drive to the county hospital took 15 minutes that felt like an hour. Sophie dozed fitfully, exhausted from crying. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other reaching back to rest gently on her knee. Ryan stared out the window, silent. I didn't push him. I knew this was the moment his two worlds were colliding harder than ever before. At the ER, the triage nurse took one look at how Sophie was protecting her arm and moved us straight back. A kind young doctor named Dr. Ramirez came in shortly after. She knelt to Sophie's level, speaking softly. "Hi, sweetheart, can you show me where it hurts?" Sophie pointed with her good hand. The doctor examined her gently, talking about how pretty the lavender dress was the whole time. Then she looked up at me. "It looks like a nursemaid's elbow." The radial head slipped out of place from the sudden pull, common in kids this age, with a hard yank on the arm. Her eyes asked the silent question. I answered plainly. Her grandmother grabbed her wrist and dragged her off the dance floor in front of over 100 people. Dr. Ramirez's pen paused. "I'm required to report this. When an adult causes an injury like this, especially in a public setting, we have to involve Child Protective Services and notify law enforcement. It's protocol." I nodded. I had expected it. "Do what you need to do." The reduction only took a few seconds. Dr. Ramirez cradled Sophie's arm, gave a gentle rotation, and we heard a soft click. Sophie yelped once, then blinked in surprise as the pain eased almost immediately. Within minutes, she was moving her wrist again, reaching for the sticker the nurse offered. Children heal so fast physically, the emotional part takes longer. While we waited for discharge papers, a female police officer arrived. She introduced herself quietly and asked to speak with me in the hallway. I told her exactly what happened, time, place, what Vivian said, how hard she pulled, the witnesses. I kept my tone factual, the way I'd give a briefing. The officer listened carefully. "This could be considered battery. The county attorney will review the medical report and statements. I'll need to collect accounts from people who saw it." I thought about all the phones that had been recording, about how quickly Vivian had started spinning her version of events. "If you've ever had to choose between keeping fake family peace and protecting your child," I said softly to you right now watching this, "you know how heavy that choice feels." I had carried that weight for years. That night, the choice became simple. Ryan sat with Sophie while I spoke to the officer. When I returned to the room, he looked up at me with red eyes. "This is going to destroy my mom," he whispered. I sat down beside him and took his hand. "Your daughter was hurt tonight, Ryan, in public, on camera, that's already done." He didn't argue. For the first time in a long time, he didn't try to defend his mother. We left the hospital around 9:30 p.m. Sophie was asleep in her booster seat, her wrist wrapped, and her pink ballet shoes now both resting in my lap. The drive home was quiet, but something important had shifted in the car with us. The illusion that we could keep pretending everything was fine had finally broken. I dropped Ryan and Sophie at the house with our sitter, then sat in the driveway for a long moment. My garment bag was still hanging in the back seat. The colonel they had waited for all evening was about to make her entrance. I pulled into our driveway and sat there for a minute with the engine running. The house was quiet. Sophie was already inside, safely tucked into bed by the sitter. Ryan had stayed with her, his face still carrying that torn expression I knew too well. For 9 years I had walked this line, trying to honor his family while protecting our own little world. Tonight that line had been crossed so violently that pretending was no longer an option. I reached into the back seat and unzipped the garment bag. My army dress screens hung there, pressed and perfect, the silver eagles on the shoulders catching the faint light from the porch. I hadn't planned to wear them tonight, not originally. But after holding my daughter in the ER, after watching her wince every time she moved her wrists, something inside me settled into absolute clarity. I wasn't going back to argue. I wasn't going back to yell. I was going back to be seen. I changed in the bedroom while the sitter waited downstairs. Each button I fastened felt deliberate, like I was putting on armor I had chosen not to wear for far too long. The jacket settled on my shoulders with familiar weight. I looked at myself in the mirror, not with pride or anger, but with quiet recognition. This was who I had always been. The woman who coordinated complex operations under pressure. The mother who could hold her daughter through pain without falling apart. The colonel who had earned every ribbon on this uniform. If you've ever hidden a big part of yourself because it made other people uncomfortable, you understand what that moment felt like. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about finally refusing to make myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I kissed Sophie's forehead before I left. She stirred slightly in her sleep, her bandaged wrist resting on the pillow. "You are wanted, baby," I whispered. "You are loved, and tonight everyone is going to know it." The drive back to Lakeview Estate took only 10 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. The fairy lights were still glowing when I pulled into the gravel lot. The reception hadn't completely died. Vivian would never let a party end early while there was still an audience, but the energy had changed. It felt thinner, more fragile. I sat in the car for one last moment, breathing slowly, then I stepped out. The gravel crunched under my polished shoes. I walked toward the entrance with my head high, shoulders back, the way I had learned to carry myself during formal ceremonies. A young lieutenant in uniform, one of Lauren's friends from the base, was standing near the gate. He saw the eagles on my shoulders before he saw my face. His posture snapped to attention instantly. He saluted sharply. "Mom." The single word carried across the quieting tent. Heads turned, one by one like dominoes falling in slow motion. The guests who had been milling around, whispering about what happened earlier, now stared openly. I returned the lieutenant's salute calmly and kept walking into the light of the tent. The entire reception went still. I could see the math happening on their faces. The quiet daughter-in-law they had dismissed for years, the woman they called always away, the mother whose child they had just watched be dragged off the dance floor. Now standing before them in full dress uniform, silver eagles gleaming, ribbons telling stories they had never bothered to ask about. Vivian was near the head table, mid-sentence, her hand still gesturing as she tried to repair her image with another group of guests. When she turned and saw me, her expression froze. The gracious hostess' smile melted away, replaced by something between shock and dawning horror. Ryan appeared at the edge of the tent. He had come back after all. His eyes widened when they landed on me, but this time there was something different in them. Recognition, maybe even pride mixed with regret. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence do its work. Silence, I've learned, is a powerful language when you've earned the right to use it. Vivian finally found her voice, thin and unsteady. "Alina, what is..." I met her eyes steadily. "This," I said calmly, my voice carrying across the quiet tent, "is the colonel everyone has been waiting for all evening." The silence in the tent was so complete I could hear the soft hum of the string lights overhead. 120 pairs of eyes were locked on me. Some faces showed confusion, others dawning understanding, and a few, mostly Vivian's inner circle, looked outright uncomfortable. Vivian recovered first, the way people like her always do. She stepped forward with her hands slightly raised, forcing that practiced hostess smile back onto her face. "Elena, sweetheart, there's clearly been a misunderstanding tonight. We were all so worried about little Sophie. You rushed off so quickly after that incident." Her voice was pitched perfectly for the room, reasonable, slightly wounded, like she was the one who had been wronged. She turned slightly so more guests could see her being the bigger person. Children get overly excited at weddings. I was only trying to keep things safe and orderly for Lauren's special day. You've turned this into something much bigger than it needs to be. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply looked at her steadily and spoke with the calm I had practiced for years in command briefings. I didn't turn anything into a production, Vivian. You did that when you grabbed my daughter by the wrist, dragged her across the dance floor, and called her a military brat in front of everyone. I'm simply no longer willing to hide who I am so you can feel comfortable. A ripple moved through the crowd. I saw phones being lowered. The young lieutenant who had saluted me earlier stood a little taller. Ryan took a few steps closer, his eyes never leaving me. Vivian's smile faltered. This is ridiculous. You show up in this costume after ruining the evening and suddenly expect everyone to treat you differently. I have given everything to this family. Everything. She was starting to lose control of the narrative, and she knew it. Her voice climbed higher. You're embarrassing all of us. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded hospital discharge slip with the case number and the officer's contact information. I didn't wave it dramatically. I simply held it in my hand so the people closest could see. My daughter is 8 years old, I said quietly, my voice carrying because the room had grown even more still. Tonight a doctor had to pop her elbow back into place after it was dislocated. The hospital was required by law to report it because an adult caused the injury. I gave my statement to the police. They'll be needing accounts from anyone who actually saw what happened on that dance floor. I let the words settle, then I looked around the tent slowly. I'm not here to argue with anyone about what they think they saw. I'm simply asking those who witnessed it, did you see what happened? For a long moment no one moved. Vivian's eyes darted around, searching for allies. Her brother, who had been nodding along with her all evening, suddenly found the floor very interesting. Then the older gentleman who had been sitting near the cake table stood up. His voice was shaky but clear. I saw it. The little girl was dancing happily. Mrs. Brenner grabbed her hard and yanked her off the floor. The child wasn't doing anything wrong. I've been sick about it for hours. A bridesmaid near the head table rose next. I saw it too. Sophie lost her shoe. She was crying. One by one, others stood, not in a mob, but in quiet, heavy moments of conscience. Lauren, the bride, still in her beautiful white dress with mascara tracks on her cheeks, stood up at the head table. I saw you do it, Mom, she said, her voice breaking. On my wedding day, I'll never forget it. The shift in the room was palpable. The story Vivian had been carefully building was crumbling in real time. Phones that had recorded her version earlier were now silent. Vivian looked around at the standing witnesses, at her family members who were no longer backing her, and something in her seemed to fracture. This is insane. You're all taking her side because of a uniform. She walks in here dressed like this and suddenly I'm the villain. I kept my tone gentle but firm. No one is the villain here tonight, Vivian, but actions have consequences, and hurting a child in public is one that can't be explained away with "I was protecting the wedding." Ryan stepped fully into the light then. He looked at his mother for a long moment, then at me. I saw the struggle on his face, years of loyalty versus the truth he could no longer deny. If you've ever watched someone you love finally choose the right side after years of staying neutral, you know how powerful that quiet moment feels. Just as the weight of the witness's words hung in the air, headlights swept across the gravel lot. The female police officer from the hospital had followed through on her promise to come by while memories were still fresh. She walked through the gate in her uniform, notebook in hand, moving with calm authority. She took in the scene without surprise, the woman in dress greens, the standing guests, Vivian's face now drained of color. "Evening," she said to the room. "I understand some of you witnessed an incident involving a child earlier tonight. I'd like to speak with anyone willing to give a statement." Vivian's composure finally broke. "This is insane," she cried, her voice loud and splintering. "This is my daughter's wedding. You're all turning against me because of a uniform. She's making this into a federal case over nothing." The officer remained professional. "Mom, this is standard procedure when a child is injured by an adult. We take these reports seriously." That's when the logic twist none of us saw coming landed. The officer glanced at her notes and spoke directly to Vivian. "Mrs. Brenner? I see from our system that this isn't your first report involving a child and physical discipline. There was an incident years ago with your younger son during a family argument. It was documented but not pursued at the time." Vivian's mouth opened then closed. The color drained further from her face. Ryan looked stunned. Even I hadn't known about that old record, but it explained so much, why she clung so desperately to control, why she lashed out when she felt her authority slipping. I stepped forward, still calm. "I'm not asking for anyone to be punished tonight. I'm asking for the truth to be on record, and I'm asking for clear boundaries going forward." I turned to face Vivian fully, my voice steady and low so the whole tent had to lean in to hear. "You will not have unsupervised time with Sophie, not at holidays, not at birthdays. Not for 5 minutes in a hallway, until you complete whatever the county requires and until you give her a genuine apology she can feel safe accepting. That's not revenge, that's a mother protecting her child. You crossed a line tonight that I will never allow again." The tent was completely silent except for the soft night breeze rustling the lights. No one defended her this time, not her brother, not her close friends. Even Lauren looked away, tears still on her cheeks. Ryan finally spoke, his voice rough but clear. He stepped up beside me. "Mom, you hurt our daughter. I watched it happen and I didn't stop you. I'm ashamed of that, but I'm not letting it continue." Vivian sat down hard in the nearest chair, the fight draining from her. For the first time all night, she looked small, just an older woman whose carefully built world was crumbling because she couldn't let go of her own pain. The officer began taking statements from the witnesses. One by one they spoke. I made myself available for any questions, then quietly stepped back. I had said what needed to be said. The record was being made not by shouting but by truth and quiet strength. If you've ever had to draw a hard line with family, not out of anger but out of love for your child, you know how heavy and how freeing that moment is. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply done shrinking. The officer finished taking initial statements and quietly left the tent, promising follow-up in the coming days. The reception had effectively ended, though a few brave guests still lingered near the edges. The fairy lights continued to glow, but the joy had long since left the evening. Vivian remained seated, staring at her hands. For the first time in all the years I had known her, she had no script, no gentle deflection, no way to reshape the narrative. The witnesses had spoken. The record was being built, and her carefully protected image as the perfect family matriarch lay in pieces on that wooden dance floor alongside Sophie's pink ballet shoe. Ryan stood beside me now, his shoulder touching mine, a small but powerful gesture. He looked at his mother and spoke with a steadiness I hadn't heard from him in years. "Mom, this has to change. You hurt Sophie tonight. You humiliated Elena for years. I've let it happen because I didn't want conflict. But I can't do that anymore, not after this." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "I only wanted everything to be perfect," she whispered. "I wanted to matter. After what my mother-in-law did to me at my own wedding, I swore I would never be invisible again. I lost control." I crouched down in front of her chair so we were eye to eye, the same way I do with Sophie. My voice stayed gentle, but the boundary was iron. "I'm sorry that happened to you. Vivian, no one deserves to feel small at their own family table, but that pain does not give you the right to put your hands on my daughter and call her a military brat. It doesn't excuse anything that happened tonight." I stood back up and addressed the small group still listening. "Here's how this is going to work from now on. I'm not pushing for criminal charges, though the county will decide that. What I am insisting on are clear boundaries. Sophie will not be alone with you. Not for holidays, not for visits, not even quick drop-offs, until you complete any required counseling and until she feels safe again. This isn't punishment, this is protection, and it is not negotiable." No one argued, not even Vivian's brother. Lauren walked over and hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for protecting her," before leading her new husband away. The remaining guests slowly began to leave, many offering quiet nods of respect as they passed me. Ryan and I walked out together toward the parking lot. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't try to smooth things over or ask me to understand his mother's side first. He simply took my hand and said, "I'm sorry it took me this long." That simple sentence meant more than any grand apology ever could. If you've ever had to hold a hard boundary with family while your heart was breaking for everyone involved, you know it's one of the loneliest yet most necessary acts of love. I wasn't angry anymore. I was exhausted but clear. We drove home in silence, the garment bag with my dress greens now hanging openly in the back seat. When we walked through the front door, the sitter had already left. Sophie was fast asleep, her bandaged wrist resting on her favorite stuffed bear, the pink ballet shoes placed neatly beside her bed. I stood in the doorway of her room for a long time, watching her breathe. This was the real payoff, not the uniform reveal or the witnesses standing up. It was knowing my daughter would wake up in a home where she no longer had to earn her place. A few weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I was standing in our kitchen making coffee when I heard it, the soft piano notes of Tiny Dancer coming from the radio. My heart caught for a second. Sophie looked up from her cereal bowl, her eyes brightening. Her wrist had healed completely, just like the doctor promised. She slid off the chair, walked to the middle of the linoleum floor, and slipped on her pink ballet shoes, the same ones that had been left behind on that dance floor. She started to spin. Slowly at first, then with more confidence, her arms opening wide like she was trying to hug the whole room. The ribbons trailed behind her, and her laughter filled the space between the notes. I set my coffee down, walked over, and took her hands. We danced together in our pajamas right there in the kitchen, twirling until we were both dizzy and laughing. When the song ended, she leaned against me, breathing fast, her head resting on my chest. "Mommy," she asked softly, "am I real family now?" I knelt down so we were eye to eye, just like I had that night in the hospital. I touched the silver eagle pin I sometimes wear on my civilian clothes and said, "Baby, you have always been real family. Real family isn't the loudest voice at the table. It's the one who protects the smallest person in the room, and that's what we are, you and me." She smiled, really smiled, and hugged me tight. In that moment, I knew the deeper healing had begun. Ryan has changed too. He calls his mother less. When she tries to test the boundaries, he holds them without me having to remind him. He's learning to stand beside us instead of in the middle. It's not perfect, but it's real progress. Vivian completed the counseling the county recommended. She sent Sophie a card with a short handwritten apology. We read it together. Sophie decided she wasn't ready to see her grandmother alone yet, and I respected that. Healing doesn't have a deadline. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel like you had to earn your place in your own family, especially as a mother, I want you to hear this. You don't have to shrink yourself to keep the peace. Your worth, your child's worth, was never up for debate. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop hiding who you are and let the truth speak for itself. I still don't make scenes, I make records, I make boundaries, and I make sure my daughter knows she belongs, exactly as she is. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it touched something in you, type boundaries in the comments. Let me know you're here. If you've been carrying something heavy with family, I see you. You're not alone. And remember, the colonel they were waiting for might already be in the room. Sometimes she's just been quiet until she decides it's time to stand up.